Welcome to the Crossing the Chasm podcast. On this podcast, we journey to cross the chasm and reconcile the two great religions of Christianity and Judaism. We will do this by learning about the various traditions of these faiths and by addressing important topics and questions through the reviewing of scripture, relevant scholarship, and interviews that can guide us on this journey. If you want to join us on this journey of reformation and reconciliation, please consider subscribing.
Hey, it's Michael Cartwright, and welcome to episode 1 of the Crossing the Chasm podcast. First, I want to thank every one of you that have decided to go on this journey with me. This is something I've been thinking about doing for some time, and I finally got the nerve to get this thing going. Today, I will be telling you my story, how I started this journey, and how this journey led me to starting this podcast. When I refer to my story, I do not mean a biography of my life, but just my story in regard to how I got on this path and became interested in the origins of Christianity and the relationship between Christianity and Judaism. Now, my story begins in the classroom. I was a Christian behavioral science major attending Cal Baptist University, also known as CBU. I was attending a class taught by Dr. Bruce Stokes. I think it was epistemology and worldview, I'm not sure. But he was talking about how the Old Testament is the foundation of the New Testament and not the other way around. The way that he presented this view was very convincing to me, and it led me to read the Torah for the first time. During my time at CBU, I was a member of the male chorale, and at the beginning of every summer, we would perform at various churches in the Western United States, and we traveled by bus. This meant that at times our travels would be up to 13 hours between destinations. This gave me ample time for reading. During one summer tour, I read through the whole Torah. Now, what I mean by the Torah in this context is the books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Now, this was not an in-depth reading. This was just a quick reading for familiarization. I skipped over sections that contained genealogies and census records. My goal was just to gain a familiarity with the Torah. When I arrived home, I started to read through the Gospels, and different aspects of the stories in the Gospels started to pop out that I didn't notice before. For example, in the teachings of Jesus, I started to notice that a lot of his teachings were not necessarily new, and that he was drawing his teaching from the Torah. This wasn't an earth-shattering realization, but it did lead me to have more of an appreciation of the Torah and the rest of the Old Testament. Another big influence in my story is the book of Romans. The book of Romans is written by the Apostle Paul, and it is an important book in the New Testament. It has a huge influence on Christian theology. There was a time shortly after graduating from college that I set out to memorize the book of Romans. It was a tall task, and I was not successful in the endeavor. However, I did memorize about 5 chapters. It was a very interesting experience. I read Romans before, but memorizing it really gave me a better grasp of Paul's train of thought. But one observation that really propelled me further down this path I'm currently on is Paul's frequent mention of the Jewish people. His letter to the Romans seemed to indicate to me that at that time, the congregation consisted of distinctly Jewish and Gentile attendees. And this led me to ask, well, where are all the Jewish people now? Why have I never seen a distinctly Jewish person at my church before? And this question activated a curiosity within me that led me to the next step on the journey, where I attended a Messianic congregation for the first time. A friend of mine knew of a Messianic rabbi that would attend his church periodically, and he extended an invite to attend a Hanukkah service. At that time, I knew very little about the Messianic movement, but wanted to learn more. I do not remember much about the details of the service, but I do remember being very captivated as I learned about the meaning of Hanukkah and how Jesus related to Hanukkah in a symbolic sense. After the service, we met with the rabbi. He was very hospitable. He invited us into his house, and we were just hitting him with questions. I brought a friend with me, and we were just both hitting him with questions. What about this? And what about that? And I remember my friend, he was saying, well, I think he's trying to make us become Jewish. And I was like, I'm not really sure what it is, but I don't think it's that simple. But I just remember walking away from the conversation very intrigued. And about a year later, I reached back out to the rabbi. We met a few times for lunch, and he recommended some books to read, which propelled me into a significant time of reading and study. And over that period of time, I engaged with various resources, some good, some not so good. But at some point, I became overwhelmed and decided I need to find other people that are doing this. So I started to attend a local Messianic congregation. I really felt that what I was learning was very important for the broader church, but I wanted to learn more within a Messianic congregational context, with the long-term goal being that I would go back to the church and share what I have learned. I spent about 10 years in the movement, and I've seen a variety of expressions and ideas in the movement. I've been in leadership positions, I've headed youth ministry, and I've headed the main Torah study ministry at a congregation, as well as having some opportunities to speak as well. My time in Messianic Judaism has been very valuable. I attended grad school as well for a few years. It was helpful in addressing some of the questions that I stated earlier, but I've recently taken a hiatus from school as I focus more on my family and I take some time to reevaluate my academic goals and needs. One thing I've learned, though, during my time in grad school is that Christianity and Judaism as we know them today were born out of the Second Temple period Judaisms of the first century. And over time, they redefined themselves in opposition to one another, creating a chasm that originally did not exist. This implies that at some point, Christianity was not a separate religion from Judaism, but was one of many Judaisms in the variegated world of the Second Temple period. And this leads us to the next section of our podcast. What can you expect from this podcast? Well, as I stated earlier, my immediate goal is to share what I am learning in hopes that it can be of some help for others that are on a similar journey. And whether we admit it or not, we are all on a journey. We should constantly be learning and re-examining our held preconceptions. And this podcast will challenge some commonly held preconceptions and will uphold some. But I hope it will lead to some fruitful dialogue between you and me and between you and the communities that you are attached to. I will discuss this further in the next episode, but if it is true that Christianity was originally a Judaism, then this has implications on our theology as Christians and consequently our rhetoric and actions toward the Jewish people and towards all people. Some of these implications will be discussed on this podcast. I will be sharing all the resources and scholars that I have interacted with and their ideas regarding the New Testament, the Jewishness of Jesus, the Jewishness of Paul, and the implications of these truths on the relationship between Christianity and Judaism, and on our spiritual journeys themselves. I have a hypothesis that ultimately these ideas have the potential to be reformative for Christianity and be the building blocks that help us bridge the chasm between Christianity and Judaism. Now that you've heard my story and have gotten to know me a little, I'd like to get to know you more. What is your story? Where are you on your journey? For you YouTube viewers, please share your comments below. And thank you for joining me for this first episode of the Crossing the Chasm podcast. Now, if you have enjoyed this podcast, please consider subscribing, liking, and sharing with your family and friends. Take care.